Hello and welcome to Module 3, Week 2 of our course. In this lecture, we continue to discuss the field of forensic chemistry, which is the application of chemistry in a legal setting. And today we focus on the field of illicit drugs, their categories, chemical properties, dangers associated with drugs abuse, and methods for their analysis in a crime lab. Please check learning objectives for this lecture. So a quick fact, as I hope you remember, that more than 75% of forensic evidence analyzed by crime labs is drug related. So I said that you might remember this because I mentioned this at the very beginning of this course as the main reason behind continuous expansion in the number of crime labs. So what is the definition of a drug? A drug is a natural or synthetic substance that is used to produce physiological, psychological effects in humans or other higher order animals. And drugs generally may have, different effect on people. While most of the illicit drugs have been originally designed as a medicine that aimed to treat various physiological or psychological conditions, such as improving quality of life, reducing pain, anxiety, and so on. On the other hand, abuse of these drugs is usually related to the desire for escaping from life responsibilities and pressures of life, and sometimes providing means of ending life via suicide. So humans have used naturally occurring drugs for thousands of years, such as alcohol in wine has been consumed from before the time of the ancient Egyptians. Narcotics derived from poppies have been used since 4000 BC, and marijuana was used as a medicinal product in China as early as 2700 BC. In the 19th century, the active compounds in poppies and coca plants were extracted from the plants and purified. The resulting substances, morphine and cocaine, were completely unregulated and were prescribed by physicians for a wide variety of applications. They were available as patent medicines and were sold in traveling shows, in drugstores, or through the mail. The control on the opium trade even led to two wars between China and European powers in the mid-19th century. Well, opium was basically illegal in China, but was a very profitable trade good for Britain, which initiated war to keep the trade going. Also, during the US Civil War, morphine was commonly used as a painkiller, and wounded veterans were sent home with morphine and needles. By the early 1900s, there were an estimated 50,000 drug addicts in the United States. And today, this number has grown to over 1 million people addicted to drugs. So drugs use and their abuse is a very serious problem in the modern society. And as of 2020, half of people as young as 12 years old and older have used illicit drugs at least once. Since year 2000, drug overdose deaths in the United States are nearing 1 million people, which is just an astonishing number. So the nature of drug abuse and addiction is based on the psychological and physical needs. And the main problem is the psychological, when the conditioned use of a drug is caused by underlying emotional needs. And then there is also a physiological dependency on the drug after repeated use, which in turn leads to many personal and social issues. So some drugs have a high psychological component of addiction, such as alcohol, heroin, or cocaine, while others, such as marijuana and codeine, have a lower potential for abuse. And while not all drugs are physically addictive, the physical dependency to pretty much any drug starts with regular intake of a drug when the interval between the doses is short enough that drug essentially never leaves the system. Drugs of abuse can be classified into four main categories: narcotics, depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogens. In each of these categories, we can find drugs that are known to trigger significant psychological dependency and some also physical dependency. The common denominator that characterizes all types of repeated drug use is the creation of psychological dependence for continued use of the drug. However, this doesn't imply that repeated abuse of drugs known to have a low potential for psychological dependency is safe or will always produce low psychological dependence. The effect would be different from one person to person. While some people can be more prone for addiction for various reasons, including psychological, behavioral, and social. But a general rule is that heavy drug users put themselves in a danger of developing a high degree of psychological dependency, regardless of the initial dependence category. Now, the continuous use of a drug, especially of certain drugs, may lead to physical dependency or addiction, and therefore a person who is addicted to a drug, being accustomed to receiving large doses, and who may had stopped using it, or sometimes even by thinking about such possibility, may experience serious physiological symptoms such as vomiting, chills, convulsions, hallucinations, and others. So again, the problem is when the drug user becomes preoccupied with the drug, always thinking when to get the next dose. And beyond the health harm, this often leads to many social problems, including crime. So let's talk about the main categories of illicit drugs in detail. The definition of narcotics: these are the drugs that originally were developed as painkillers, aiming at reducing or eliminating pain, similar to analgesics, and as a result, they affect the blood pressure, pulse rate, breathing rate, and other systems. The drugs in the hallucinogens category are known to affect the mood, attitude, and perception of reality. Depressant drugs affect the essential functions of the central nervous system, CNS, producing a feeling of calm and reducing anxiety, and may also induce sleep. The drugs known as stimulants, and as the name suggests, can stimulate bodily functions by increasing alertness and muscle and brain activity. The drugs in the traditional analgesic category are rarely abused unless they belong to narcotics, which have a very similar effect to analgesics, just being more potent. And lastly, the anabolic steroids are natural and semi-synthetic hormones which promote muscle growth and can be abused by bodybuilders and professional athletes to increase muscle mass and stamina. So let's first talk about narcotics. Narcotic is a substance that numbs the senses, placing the user in a stupor that eventually results in sleep. Most narcotics have depressant effect on blood pressure, pulse rate, and breathing rate. And the source of most narcotics is opium. Well, opium is a resin produced by a poppy plant, which is called Papaver somniferum. Now, somniferum in Latin means sleepy. Opium is a source of morphine, which I'm sure you've heard of. And morphine is derived from a word morphus, who is the Greek god of dreams, which you also probably know. So most of narcotics belong to opiates, as being derived from opium. while morphine is the basic precursor of most natural opiates. Morphine is the source of a very potent and dangerous drug, heroin. And heroin is essentially a semi-synthetic opiate, which in its pure chemical form is called diacetyl morphine. It was invented by Charles Adler Wright, an English chemist, back in 1874. And as I said, diacetyl morphine is a much more potent than morphine. Besides being a powerful analgesic, heroin produces that known high effect that is accompanied by drowsiness and a deep sense of well-being. However, this effect is very short and generally lasting only 3 to 4 hours. Regular use of heroin or any other narcotic drugs invariably leads to physical dependence with all of its dire consequences. And these effects obviously led to the banning of this chemical from medicinal use, and quite predictably, heroin quickly became a popular illegal drug, widely traded and consumed out on the streets. By the way, the high potency of diacetyl morphine is due to these two acetyl groups that are added to morphine molecule via reaction with acetic anhydride, which leads to faster transport of this molecule to the brain. And in the brain, these two acetyl groups are clipped off enzymatically, which leads to delivery of morphine in a higher concentration straight to the brain. And another widely used and abused opiate is codeine. Now, codeine is also present in opium, but it is usually prepared synthetically from morphine, and you can clearly see the similarity in the chemical structure between these two. It is commonly used as a cough suppressant in cough syrup. Codeine is only 1/6 as strong as morphine, so it's not an attractive street drug for addicts. However, due to its increasing abuse, it became regulated and requires prescription. So this is Harold Shipman, a general practitioner from England who was very well respected doctor in his community for many years. Later on, however, he became known as Dr. Death. Now, apparently he has been administering lethal doses of diamorphine to his patients, mostly elderly ladies, for over 20 years. It is estimated that he has killed about 250 victims, which infamously crowns him as the most prolific serial killer in history. Now, to avoid being caught, he was signing patients' death certificates, falsifying medical records to indicate that they have been in poor health, and also sending the bodies to cremation to obviously eliminate any evidence. It is unclear what was the main reason behind his killings, but it is pretty clear that he has been influenced by his mother dying from lung cancer and taking morphine to ease her pain back when he was young. And this essentially became his modus operandi. The reason he got caught was mainly because he forged a will of one of his victims, and the family became very suspicious. Long story short, he was finally arrested in 1998, found guilty in at least 15 murders, and eventually committed suicide in his cell in 2004. Now, in addition to the natural molecule of morphine and the semi-synthetic codeine, there are many synthetic opioids which are designed as morphine analogs, or in other words, chemicals that have similar molecular structure to morphine. One of these is oxycodone, which has very similar physiological effect on the body as morphine, but much less addictive. It is prescribed actually to several million patients per year for treatment of chronic pain. And oxycodone is synthesized by oxidizing codeine and you can clearly see the similarity in their molecular structure. Methadone is another well-known synthetic opiate, and methadone is actually used to treat addiction to heroin with minimal side effects. By the way, heroin that is sold out on the streets is very far from its pure diacetyl morphine formulation, and it's usually cut or diluted with various impurities such as sugar, caffeine, barbiturates, and so on. From the forensic perspective, we can not only identify the drug, but also analyze the impurities to find out where this drug has been manufactured and establish potential links between the doses sold at the illegal drug market and linking criminal cases and people. And this is, of course, another example of, that's right, law court exchange principle. On the other hand, some of these synthetic opiates are actually much more powerful than the original morphine molecule due to various modifications. And one of such molecules is called atropine, which is a powerful tranquilizer. So if there's a large animal on the loose, like an elephant or a T-Rex, these animals can be shot and temporarily immobilized with an atropine dart. This chemical has a very fast effect on the body, but also has a very short life, which makes it very useful for this job. This particular drug is not really abused due to it being fatal to humans, even in low doses. So again, there are many different analogs of morphine. Some are more potent in their narcotic effect than the original form, and some are less. For example, codeine, which we just discussed, is significantly weaker in its effect than morphine. Now, in most countries, codeine can be obtained relatively easily and often over the counter. And codeine can then be converted into diazomorphine, which is an analog of morphine, although with much stronger effect, similar to heroin. Now, in order to convert codeine to diazomorphine, you need to remove one carbon atom, one oxygen atom, and add a few hydrogen atoms. And one way to do this is a recipe that is available on the street, which is to treat codeine with iodine, red phosphorus, hydrochloric acid, and a solvent such as gasoline. Now, all these chemicals are also easily available for purchase, and some drug addicts, especially in Russia, use this recipe to produce a drug known as crocodile. Why crocodile? Well, because those who inject themselves with this awful brew get a terrible skin condition due to enormous damage that these chemicals and byproducts make to their tissues. Their skin becomes hard and scaly like the skin of a crocodile, and this drug is extraordinarily addictive and very toxic. Once people start taking crocodile, they will take it continuously until they die, or get treated in a specialized clinic, although such treatment is not always successful. This drug has started in Russia a few years ago, but has quickly spread around the world, including the US. Now, another category of popular drugs are hallucinogens. A hallucinogen is a substance that induces changes in mood, thought, or perception, and often make you believe or see things that do not exist. So the most abused and controversial hallucinogen is marijuana, right? So marijuana qualifies as the most widely used illicit drug in the United States today. And yes, I know it is legal in California, but it is still illegal according to federal law. While there are claims that marijuana is harmless and not addictive, its long-term effect on health are still largely unknown, while there are more and more scientific publications demonstrating that marijuana is in fact addictive and may have severe effect on your body and mind. Now, the chemicals that are responsible for these hallucinogenic properties of marijuana are called cannabinoids, while the two main molecules extracted from the plant are tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, and this chemical is the main substance giving the psychoactive effect. And another one is called CBD, or cannabidiol. Now, interestingly, CBD does not have the same effect as the THC and will actually negate the psychoactive effects of THC on the body if both are present. The THC content of cannabis varies in different parts of the plant, while the highest concentration is generally found in the resin and the lowest in the stem, roots, and seeds. So the highly concentrated part of the plant, the resin, is usually compressed into these briquettes, blocks, and consumed via smoking. By the way, an interesting historical fact, you all know the word assassin, which means a professional killer, right? Now, according to historical claims, the term assassin has roots in the Arabic word hashashin, which literally means hashish smokers. And the etymology, this word goes back to approximately 11th century to a religious and political group who used to kill their political opponents. And according to legend, the members of this group were eternally loyal to their leader, who could command them to do anything he wished, including jumping off a rock to their death. And their loyalty was a large part due to being constantly under the influence of hashish. So it's quite different from what is now called recreational use, right? So regarding the recreational use of marijuana and claims that it does not affect you at all, well, as I said, there are more and more evidence that marijuana actually does harm you, especially after heavy long-term use. And as a fact, cannabinoids do affect your thinking and slower the reaction time. So again, any drug abuse is bad. Now, other drugs from this category of hallucinogens, or also called psychedelics, include the infamous LSD, ecstasy, PCP, and others. Now, LSD is probably one of the best known psychedelic drugs, and it was first synthesized by Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann back in 1938 from lysergic acid. This drug may cause mental, visual, and auditory hallucinations, which can feel very real, while the effects can last for up to 20 hours. It also causes increased blood pressure and body temperature, similar to other drugs. While LSD is considered to be non-addictive and with low potential for abuse, its frequent use rapidly builds tolerance, requiring exponentially larger doses to feel an effect. And as a result, it may cause anxiety, delusions, and even paranoia. Another well-known drug in this category is ecstasy, or MDMA. MDMA is not only a hallucinogen but also a stimulant drug, and it not only distorts your perception of reality but also increases your energy, or more precisely, gives a perception of increased energy. It creates a feeling of euphoria, but has also a physiological effect on your body. As your muscles start cramping, you increasingly sweat. You may also feel chills and even have seizures. Due to its effect on the body heat regulation, it can lead to heart and kidney failure and death. Phencyclidine, or PCP, is another dangerous hallucinogen. It is also called angel dust on the streets, and besides its psychedelic effect on the body, it may also trigger violent behavior, while its mind distortion effects, so-called flashbacks, may last very long time even after stopping usage of this drug. In addition to all the nasty psychological and physiological effects on your body, its prolonged use can lead to an increased risk of suicide. So depressants are another class of drugs which include alcohol or ethanol, barbiturates, tranquilizers, and various substances that can be sniffed to get high, such as glue, paint, and gasoline. Now, depressants essentially diminish a person's functional activity, usually by inhibiting the activity of the nervous system. Alcohol is the most widely used and abused depressant, which suppresses the brain's control of thought process and muscle coordination. It is also the less controlled drug with a range of destructive effects on your own body and towards others. And again, we all may agree that a glass of wine once in a while is totally okay, but when people start drinking spirits with a high ethanol concentration and do this on almost everyday basis, that's definitely may look like an addiction. And we'll discuss this more in detail in the next lecture. So other very common drugs in this category are called barbiturates, which are derivative of the barbituric acid. And these are medications that are often prescribed to treat insomnia, epilepsy, acute migraines or heavy headaches. So there are many legal drugs in this category of barbiturates. So medications such as Valium or Xanax that you likely heard of. These are commonly prescribed to tens or even hundreds of thousands of people annually, mostly to treat anxiety. The problem starts as usual, again, when people start abusing these drugs, which may cause severe effects ranging from impaired judgment and confusion to much worse, such as body system failure, brain damage, and even death. So another category of illicit drugs are stimulants, and these are the drugs that stimulate central nervous system, and these substances tend to increase alertness and physical activity. As with other drugs, some are synthetic and some can be obtained from natural sources. One class of synthetic drugs that is widely spread and truly became an epidemic these days is amphetamine and its analog methamphetamine. So these drugs, when abused, are injected intravenously, causing an initial rush like burst of energy, followed by a feeling of pleasure. The nice feeling, however, is followed by a period of exhaustion and a prolonged period of severe depression. As for natural stimulants, cocaine is the most known and widely used drug in this category, and cocaine is a chemical alkaloid that is produced by the tree Erythroxylon coca, which has been cultivated in Latin America since ancient times, particularly in countries such as Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia. So why did the people up in the Andes mountain grow the coca plant? The reason is that living up in such high altitude, you need a lot of stamina, and you can get this by consuming small doses of cocaine, which you could obtain, for instance, by chewing coca leaves or drinking some coca tea, and this would boost your physical stamina. The problem is that it has a lot of side effects, similar to amphetamines, especially when it's being abused. So crack is another very dangerous drug that is being abused by too many people, and crack is made by mixing cocaine with baking soda and water, then heating this mixture and eventually smoking this stuff. So crack is highly addictive and will ruin your life very quickly. By the way, according to legend, the original recipe for the Coca-Cola drink actually contain extracts of coca leaf and therefore would have contained small amounts of cocaine. Although the recipe for that soft drink is a secret, as you know, we can be quite confident that cocaine ingredient has been eventually removed from that recipe. So synthetic amphetamines have a lot of derivatives or chemical analogs. Well, some are used as prescribed drugs, such as Ritalin, that is widely used to treat ADHD and attention problems in kids and adults. But there are also others like, as I mentioned, methamphetamine, phenethylamine, phentermine, ephedrine, pseudoephedrine, and many others, which are much more powerful, more dangerous, and more addictive than the original amphetamine formula. All these drugs are highly toxic, especially to the brain and especially to kids and young adults, and their abuse quickly leads to malnutrition, violent behavior, paranoia, memory loss, and brain damage, which go beyond the physical dependency even after stopping using these drugs. As you probably have seen in the media, we're in the mid of meth epidemic, as this drug is being smuggled and distributed in alarmingly increased rates in the last few years, leading to a high rate of overdoses and associated death. Many of the methamphetamine drugs sold by dealers are also cut or diluted with other chemicals. And again, from the forensic perspective, we can analyze each of these drugs and the impurities in these drugs to establish its origin in order to identify the lab where this drug is manufactured. So many drugs in this category are also known as club drugs or date rape drugs, and that's because many of these drugs are used at night clubs to help people enjoy the night by increasing their senses and energy. And while some have additional sedative or hypnotic effect that impairs cognitive functions like these GHB and Rofinol. And as a result, the affected person may feel confusion and amnesia when they won't remember what happened to them in the last 24 hours or so. So these club drugs and date rape drugs can cause more severe problem beyond memory loss and a potential sexual abuse, especially when they are mixed with other drugs. For example, a story that my friend told me recently. So his niece, a young girl, only 22 years old, went to a bar with her work colleagues, and at some point of the evening she lost consciousness, collapsed, and was taken to emergency. She suffered from total organ failure and died a few days later. Now, apparently one of her colleagues was trying to initiate romantic relationships with her for some time and decided to facilitate the process by adding a date rape drug to her drink. And after a while, when he didn't see the desired effect, he decided to add another drug, some other drug, to her drink, which together with alcohol and the previous drug led to severe brain, liver, and heart damage, resulting in death of this young woman. And the last main class of illicit drugs that are often get abused are anabolic steroids. So anabolic steroids are androgenic performance enhancing drugs that are synthetic derivatives of testosterone and natural male hormone. And these steroids are also have legitimate medical purposes, but are often get abused by bodybuilders and elite athletes using these to enhance their physical performance at sports competitions. And as with other drugs, their abuse may lead to long-term serious medical issues. So to conclude, physical drug dependence is usually a result of the psychological dependence, and it is manifested by the constant preoccupation with the drug, resulting in a serious damage not only to your body but also to relationships with other people, including your family and friends, which in turn leads to violent and criminal behavior, incarceration, and high risk of death due to overdose or criminal activity. So stay away from drugs. And from the law perspective, we have Title 21, which governs food and drugs in the United States Code, also known as the Controlled Substance Act, CSA. So CSA consolidates all existing dangerous drug laws into a single comprehensive law. And this law classifies all substances that are regulated under existing federal law into one of 5 schedules. The schedule is based on each substance medicinal value, risk of harm, and potential for abuse or addiction. The extent to which a drug is controlled depends upon the schedule into which it is placed. So from time to time, this drug's classification is updated due to constant production of new derivatives or analogs of the known drugs. So here's Schedule 1, which is reserved for the most dangerous drugs that have no recognized medical use. And while cannabis is legal in California, it is still a prohibited substance at the federal level due to its high potential for abuse and no scientific basis for accepted medical use. So therefore, if you're dreaming about law enforcement career, especially at the top agencies like the FBI and the US Secret Service, but you have used marijuana even sporadically in the last few years, you can forget about a federal job, even if you stopped using cannabis a while ago. So just keep this in mind. And so for Schedule 2, they are drugs with still high potential for use. Some may have some accepted medical use in the United States, but they have severe restrictions, and that's because of their potential for severe psychological and physical dependence. And then Schedule 3, which these drugs have less potential for abuse than Schedule 1 and 2, with some accepted medical use in the United States, and their the potential for physical dependence is lower than Schedule 1 and 2, but they have high psychological dependence. And same logic goes for Schedule 4 and finally Schedule 5, where we have pretty much most of the prescribed medications. Okay, so that was the information about main categories of illicit drugs, their potential psychological and physiological effects, and also relevant legislation governing these controlled substances. And in the second part of this lecture, we'll learn more about the different analytical methods that are used in crime labs by forensic chemists to analyze these illicit drugs.